This is our wellness webinar, Managing Emotional Reaction to Increase Connection and Get Your Needs Met, which is kind of a mouthful. It really just means slowing down a little bit, recognizing our emotional reaction, and once we can recognize our emotional reaction, use the knowledge of that emotional reaction to ask others to support us, to meet our needs, and to really let them know what it is that we need in order to get our emotional needs met. Because I think a lot of times people kind of can feel confused about how to meet our emotional needs because they know how to meet their own, but they don't necessarily know how to meet ours. And so we have to kind of help them out to get those emotional needs met. So this is being recorded so that I'm going to keep everybody on mute just to kind of ease the recording process. But I am going to leave time at the end for questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat and I will get to them at the end of the presentation so that we can kind of make sure that everybody is understanding what we're talking about and is getting what they want out of tonight's presentation. So my name is Alexandra Marshall. I'm a licensed professional counselor. Before I was a counselor, I was a lawyer. And I found that I encountered a lot of emotional needs that weren't getting met when I was a lawyer. And I really wanted to understand why people react the way they do and how to react more effectively, both in my working life and in my own personal life. So that's kind of what drew me to counseling. And I think that some of the skills we're going to talk about here tonight I use a lot in my own life. So I will try to keep it interesting by using stories from my own life to kind of illustrate some of the things that we're talking about. Because I think that kind of makes it more practical for everybody to understand. But if there are questions about how to apply these things in your own life that you want to put in the chat, I'm happy to answer those at the end. And you know, if there are things that I go too fast on, please let me know, because I do tend to kind of move at my own pace. So if there's something that I go too fast on or not fast enough on, please let me know. All right, so let's get started. So like I said, tonight we're going to talk a lot about managing our emotional reactions, but in order to manage our emotional reactions, we have to recognize our emotional reactions. We have to give them names, and we have to recognize that just because we have an emotion and that emotion kind of urges us to act in a certain way, it doesn't mean that we actually have to act on that emotion. So recognizing and naming the emotion can give us a little bit of distance from the emotion. It makes us more of an observer than an experiencer of the emotion. And that's kind of a place that we want to get to, because our emotions can be overwhelming. They can kind of swamp all reason and they can take over. And it's really useful to slow down a little bit, get a little space between you and your emotion, put a name to that emotion, and then recognize that you have a choice about how to respond to that emotional reaction. I find that sometimes just saying the emotion out loud, so I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling sad, can act as almost a soothing tool. It gives me kind of a break from experiencing the emotion, takes me out of the overwhelming physical experience of the emotion, and lets me kind of look at how I'm feeling and make a decision about how to react. So we want to slow down our responses to emotional cues. Emotions really are sort of a quick response to stimulus. That stimulus can come in the form of other people, it can come in the form of situations, it can come in the form of, you know, things that we see on television, things that we hear on the radio, things that people say to us, things that we get in the mail. There are a lot of emotional cues and they trigger an emotional response. And what we want to do is not stop experiencing emotions. We want to just create a small gap between the experience and the feeling of the emotion and our reaction to it. Because emotions sort of imply a response. If I feel scared, I want to run away. If I feel angry, I want to yell. Those kinds of behaviors in response to emotions are a choice that we make. And so what I'm hoping to do is to give you a little space between the emotion itself and your response to it, to make a choice about how to respond. We also need to then identify what we need in emotional situations. I think a lot of times we think we know what we need in an emotional situation because we have sort of an urge to do something, or an urge to get something, or an urge to cope in some way. But those urges and those instinctive responses aren't always what we actually need long term. They aren't always what's best for our relationships long term. And they aren't always in line with the person that we want to be long term. An example from my own life is that, I live in Houston, Texas. I know that not all of you do. I saw Teresa said that she's from New York. So I have road rage because the roads around here are terrible. And a lot of times I would find myself in the car really angry and kind of driving aggressively. And my emotions were telling me that I needed to stand up for myself, that I needed to get somewhere on time, that I needed to be in control of the situation. But what I actually needed in that situation, what I actually need anytime I get in the car, is just to get to my destination safely. So my emotions were telling me one thing, but my long-term self-interest and my safety needs were really asking for a different behavior. So I needed to slow down and think, why do I get in the car? Do I get in the car to, teach that driver who cut me off how to be a better driver? Or do I get in the car to get to my destination safely? Well, I get in the car to get to my destination safely. So what do I need to do to soothe that feeling of anger, or that feeling of frustration, to allow me to meet my long-term needs? So identifying what we actually need in an emotional situation is really hard. So it's easy for me to put it as a bullet point on an agenda. It's really hard to do in practice. What it means is that we just need to slow down. We need to pay attention to what's actually going on. And then we need to ask ourselves, well, what do I actually need in this situation? What are my long-term goals in this situation? What are my short-term goals in this situation? What's most important to me in this situation? Once we know what we actually want or need in a situation, we are better able to make an effective decision about how to respond to our emotions. Much like in my road rage example, I could respond by tailgating or cutting that other driver off, or by not letting them in the exit lane, or there are a lot of ways that I could respond, but that's not very effective. So a more effective decision is to turn up the radio, to focus on driving safely, to focus on what I'm going to do when I get to my destination, to do those kinds of things that are going to soothe the anger and get me through that situation and to my destination more effectively. Giving into my emotions in that situation doesn't make me safer, and it doesn't improve my experience or my life. It doesn't help me to get what I need. So we want to make decisions that are effective at getting what we need. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about is asking others to support or respect our emotional needs. This is really hard because it requires us to be a little vulnerable with the people in our lives. It requires us to know what we need and then be clear about what it is that we need and what it is that we're feeling, what it is that we're experiencing, and then being specific about asking for what we need. Because my assumption really is that people want to love us. People want to meet our emotional needs, but they don't always know how. So we have to help them out by giving them some understanding of what our emotional needs are. So how do you do that? there are a couple of different ways that you can do that, depending on what it is that you actually want out of the situation. So we're going to talk about identifying the need, and then we're going to talk about different strategies that you can use depending on what it is that you need out of a situation, whether it's to just get a thing done, or if it's to maintain and improve the relationship, or if it's to maintain your self-respect. Those are three different kinds of needs that can arise in an emotional situation, or that can take priority in an emotional situation, because obviously there are going to be situations in which both our need to maintain the relationship and our need to get a thing done are important. So we want to make sure that we are identifying what our priority is, and then being effective at asking for that kind of help. So again, questions, please submit them in the chat. For some reason, I can't see the chat when I am screen sharing, so I will try and pop in and out if just to check on the chat, but largely we'll save 15 minutes at the end to go through questions. So we have to start with mindfulness, which it seems like a lot of times I have clients say, you know, I know what my emotions are. I know what I'm feeling. I just don't know what to do with the feeling. But the reality is that mindfulness of our emotions is a practice. This is the practice of observing what's going on inside ourselves as well as outside of ourselves without trying to change it. That's kind of a confusing thing, because I think we think, I experience these emotions and I need to respond to them right away. They feel really urgent. They feel really immediate. And so the practice of mindfulness is getting used to observing your emotions almost from a distance, without feeling like you need to grab hold of them, without feeling like you need to do something to respond to them in that exact moment that you experience them. So it's accepting that we're going to have emotions and allowing them to sort of proceed as they will in that moment without responding. So practicing mindfulness is practicing checking in with yourself and paying attention to what's going on inside your body, paying attention to what you're observing, paying attention to what you're telling yourself is going on, without trying to challenge your story, or without trying to feel better, or without trying to respond to the emotion. So we want to practice watching what's going on with ourselves. I think it's good to practice these kinds of new habits by attaching them to a habit that already exists. So a lot of times, brushing your teeth is one that always comes to mind, because that's a thing that we all do every day, I hope, in the morning. So attaching a new habit, like practicing mindfulness, first thing in the morning for about 5 minutes, is a good habit to get into, and a good way to build the skill of watching what's going on. So checking in with yourself, you know, how am I feeling right now? What is the physical sensation of brushing my teeth like? What are the thoughts that I'm having? What are the emotions that I'm experiencing? What am I worrying about? So the goal of mindfulness is to be present in our actual lives as they are happening, and to experience reality as it is. A lot of times we experience reality as we think it is, or as we perceive it. And how we think reality is often colored by our past experiences, by our past relationships, by how we expect reality to be, as opposed to how it really is. So practicing mindfulness means being sort of wholly in the moment of what you're doing. So wholly in the moment of brushing your teeth, without worrying about what comes next, without worrying about what came before. So in order to practice mindfulness, we need to, one, observe what is with focused attention using all of our senses. One of the ways that we do that is by asking ourselves, what am I smelling right now? What am I seeing right now? What can I feel right now? What can I hear right now? And what can I taste right now? All of the senses give us information, and I think we get used to relying on one or two of them without kind of taking in what's happening with the others. So we want to focus our attention on what we are actually experiencing using all of our senses in the moment. We then want to describe what we experience without judgment. If it wasn't observed, it can't be described. So to illustrate what that means, I like to tell a story or use an example. So if, let's say, we were walking down the street, and I was walking one direction on one sidewalk, and you were across the street walking the other direction. And you looked across the street and you saw me and you recognized me from this webinar and you thought, oh, I remember her. And you waved at me, right? You looked at me and you waved at me. And I kept walking. Here's where I would ask you all to join in and chime in with how you would feel. But what I will tell you is that usually clients tell me they would feel hurt. They would feel ignored. They might get angry. They might wonder what they had done wrong. So all of those things are not actually things that they observed about me, right? They weren't in the facts that I gave you about the story. All I told you was that I kept walking. So I didn't say that I saw you. I didn't say that I frowned at you. I didn't say that I recognized you. I didn't say whether maybe I was crying. I didn't say whether I was looking down at my phone. I didn't say anything about what I was actually doing. Maybe she's mad at me. Maybe she's doesn't like me. Maybe I've done something wrong. All of those things are, again, interpretations that you added, or that client in their minds in the past. So we want to describe only what we experience, right? So in that circumstance, you'd want to describe, I saw the woman that did my webinar, the woman with the unstable web connection who did my webinar. She was walking down the sidewalk across the street. I waved at her. She didn't wave back. We want to leave out all of the judgments that we make. We want to leave all of the stories that we apply to the situations. We want to just describe, when we're practicing mindfulness of our emotions, what we actually experience and what we actually see, as opposed to our interpretation of it. We also want to participate in the present moment without self-consciousness or judgment. So what that means is that we want to be engaged with what we're doing. This is sort of, when we're practicing mindfulness, this is the idea that you want to dance like nobody is watching, right? Sometimes when you are completely involved in something, you aren't thinking about what comes next. You aren't worried about what others are thinking of you. You aren't interpreting things. You are just participating in the present moment. I think about participating when I'm doing things that I do to take care of myself, when I'm doing things that I do to help myself to feel good. So things like taking a walk, things like taking a hot bath or eating dinner. We want to do those things without judging ourselves, without letting the moment and participating in it. We want to let go of our assumptions about what's happening. If we are going to assume something, and this is just from my own experience, kind of best practice, we want to assume that everyone is doing their best. Now, this doesn't mean everybody is doing the best that they could. This certainly doesn't mean from an objective standard everybody's doing the best. I certainly am not, from an objective standard, always doing the best that I could. I could have a better internet connection. But that they are doing the best that they could under the circumstances and given the skills and abilities that they have available to them at that time. That's something that I offer to all of my clients, because I want them to know that I think everybody's trying. I think everybody's trying really hard to feel better, to do better, to do the best that they can to survive and thrive. And I want us to start giving that assumption or offering that assumption to others in our lives, because it allows us to look at what they're doing, not from a perspective of they're trying to hurt me, but from a perspective of, I wonder why they're doing what they're doing. I wonder why they're reacting this way. It allows us to be curious about our interactions. And I think that's an important component of mindfulness, is being curious about what's going on, being curious about ourselves and about our interactions with others. It allows us to kind of analyze what's going on in our interactions, analyze what's going on in our relationships, without feeling so overwhelmed and so swamped by our emotions. So, speaking of being swamped, I think of emotions a lot like waves. They kind of roll in and overwhelm us, they crash down on us, but then they recede pretty quickly. Neuroscientists have estimated that the physiological response that we call an emotion actually only lasts for about 90 seconds. Emotions are pretty quick and pretty short-lived. They don't last forever. That said, my emotions don't last for 90 seconds. I mean, when I am upset about something, it's definitely for longer than 90 seconds. And I would assume that you feel that way as well. The thing that keeps emotions going is the stories that we tell about them, the way that we interpret them, and the narratives that we develop about them, and how those narratives shape how we expect other things to happen. So when we're sitting on the beach, like I was when I took this picture, we start to believe that we can kind of see a pattern in the waves, that we know what's coming next, that we can predict what's coming. But that's not really actually true. We can't predict when the waves are coming just based on what we see from sitting on the beach. We have to know a lot more, right? We'd have to know a lot more about the tides. We'd have to know about the winds. We'd have to know a lot about the reef formations that are under the waves. We just have to have a lot more knowledge than we actually have to actually predict the waves. But we start to think that we can, based on what we're seeing and based on what we're experiencing. And so, much like the waves, we want to kind of be detectives and find out what's going on, what's bringing the waves in, what's causing the waves. I think it's normal for humans to tell stories about what's happening. It's normal for people to develop narratives and expectations about how other people see them. Oh, everybody always just thinks I'm such a pushover. Everybody always just takes advantage of me. Everybody always gets mad at me. I'm always annoying people. I mean, those are things that I hear a lot from clients. And I think once we develop that narrative, there is the idea of confirmation bias, which in research means that a researcher who develops a theory will then see evidence that their theory is right in everything that they look at. They will only see the evidence that their theory is right. They won't see any evidence that their theory is wrong. Emotions and narratives kind of work that way in our lives. We start to believe that because this is the narrative, that I always make people mad, then we see evidence that we always make people mad, right? So if your narrative is that you make people mad, and then we experience walking down the street in the way that I told you about in the earlier story, and I don't respond to your wave, you're more likely to see that as evidence that you've made me mad. And then go to that story of, well, I make people mad, so she's mad. I wonder what I did wrong. And now we are feeling a lot of anxiety, all from me not waving when we were walking down the street. So our emotions tend to drive our actions. And they can be really hard to regulate. Emotions are biological. Our genetics drive a lot of how we feel. They're learned. Our relationships with our families and with our friends and with our partners and with everybody in our lives can affect our emotional responses. It can be hard to regulate emotions because we can lack the skills to regulate them. And also, it can be hard to regulate emotions because we get feedback from our emotional reactions. So if I want my husband to do the dishes, and one of the ways that I can get him to do the dishes is by screaming at him, he's probably going to do the dishes. It's not going to be good for our relationship long term, but it's going to work in that situation. And so the feedback that I'm getting is that this works. The feedback that I'm getting is that this is a way to get my husband to do the dishes and that it's successful. So I'm more likely to yell than in the future, which makes it harder to eliminate the yelling response, even if I become aware that it's affecting my relationship. So emotions can really drive our responses, and they can be really hard to regulate. So what's helpful, and like I said before, naming our emotions is really helpful. So I've put on the right here, it's the feeling wheel, which is developed by Gottman, who works a lot with couples on managing emotional responses. I think it's really helpful, and there are lots of different versions of it online, but basically what it does is it takes the main emotions and it puts them at the center of the wheel, and then spiraling out from them are different kind of underlying emotions. So it lets us kind of drill down to what actually we're experiencing. A lot of times it's really easy to be mad, but what kind of mad am I, right? Am I hostile? Am I hateful? Am I critical? What kind of mad am I? And then even within that, what's driving it, right? So jealousy is listed under mad, but it's really kind of a different emotion, and it implies different needs. So drilling down within the emotions to figure out what it is that we're actually feeling is really helpful, because it lets us identify what the emotion actually is and what the need actually is. There really is no such thing as a bad emotion. All emotions are useful in some way. All emotions get us ready for action, right? So anxiety, while it's uncomfortable, is useful, right? Our anxious response, our physical response to anxiety was developed like thousands of years ago when we lived in caves, and the thing we were anxious about was, I don't know, a tiger coming to eat us. So in that case, if a tiger was really coming to eat us, our physical response to anxiety is useful because it gets us ready to run away. Your heart beats faster, it's pumping more blood to your muscles, your breath gets short, you're taking in oxygen, you want to store it up in your muscles so you're ready to run. You get tunnel vision. You don't really need to look around to run, you just need to look ahead of you. It's hard to think clearly because you don't need your brain to run away. You need your muscles. That's a physical response. Thinking about it really slows down response. So anxiety is useful in that situation, but it's not always useful in the situations that we find ourselves in now. It's not a bad emotion. It's good to be aware of when you're anxious, but it's not always effective to act on it. The other thing I want to point out is that a lot of emotions are response emotions. So we will have a primary emotion and then a secondary emotion. I think of anger as almost all being a secondary emotion. It's a response emotion that we go to in response to an emotion that we're experiencing. Anger often follows hurt or sad or lonely or jealous. We go to anger because it feels powerful. We go to anger because it feels like a way of managing our reactions. So we want to always drill down underneath some of these emotions to figure out what's actually going on. So a lot of times I use anger as sort of a sign that I need to figure out what's going on underneath it. And I use anger as a sign that I need to kind of think a little bit about what's going on underneath the other person as well, if I'm in a safe place to deal with it. Recognizing our emotions lets us be a little bit more effective about them, right? If I think, well, I'm just sad, it doesn't give me a lot of ways to attack it. But if I think I'm lonely, then I'm given sort of ideas about how to approach that. I'm given ideas about where to go next, right? If I'm lonely, I can reach out for someone. I can call a friend, or I can arrange to meet up with someone in better times. Or I can write a letter or an email. Recognizing the emotion and drilling down to what the specific emotion is gives us sort of avenues to approach those emotions. I see I'm getting a couple of things in the chat, so I'm going to pop out here and check. Okay, so I see one of the questions is, are interpretations the same as making assumptions? Does curiosity lead to empathy? That's a good question. I think curiosity can lead to empathy. Curiosity is the attempt to understand where someone is coming from, right? Curiosity is wondering about what's happening and wondering about what's happening for somebody else. And that allows us to kind of imagine what led to that feeling and what caused that reaction, and then to kind of deal with what's actually happening, right? Interpretations are a lot like making assumptions. Interpretations are our own set of assumptions. They're our own narrative about what's happening in a situation. And they're formed based on our past experiences, our past relationships, and sort of the feedback that we've always gotten. Let's see, can you explain the relationship of the outer circle of the feeling wheel? Sure. So the outer circle relates to the inner circle in that they're drilled down sort of, the outer circle of the feelings wheel are sort of lighter emotions. They're the smaller feelings that maybe build up over time into the bigger feelings. They're the ones that we kind of recognize, kind of accumulate into the bigger feelings. They also are often hard for us to recognize initially. I think a lot of people are well versed at saying I'm scared, or I'm mad, or I'm happy, right? I haven't heard a lot of people say I'm powerful, but we recognize the big emotion. What we want to do is kind of peel back the layers to what's really going on. Well, what, I'm being taken advantage of? Am I mad as I'm, let's see, hateful because I feel like hatred for this person because our historical relationship has been so bad? So am I more inclined to that? Or am I feeling irritable, right? The shade of mad. Could you explain how the words correlate to each other on the emotions drive actions wheel? So the words correlate in that the ones at the center are the big emotion. They're the ones that are the most obvious emotions. Mad, sad, scared, joyful, powerful, peaceful. Those are emotions that most of us kind of think, yeah, I recognize that and I can kind of identify that, and when I feel that, I know what's happening. Lost all my bullets. The ones on the outside of the wheel are smaller. They're more discreet, and they're often more accurate, right? Because lonely is different than ashamed, a lot like sad, right? They both feel kind of similar. They both involve similar physical experiences. Slow down. We want to, when we get kind of activated, use our emotional reactions as a stop sign. So when you're driving a car and you come to a stop sign, you need to stop and look around and then continue on. We want to put up a stop sign. When we get strong emotions, we want to think of them like that wave that's peaking and sort of surf along the top of it for long enough that we can make a decision that's not just a result of the in the moment emotion. That is, make a decision that takes into account our longer term goals and needs. One of the ways that we need to do that is by tolerating being uncomfortable. You know, when we are highly emotional, when we're really sad, when we're really angry, when we're really hurt, it's really uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good. Nobody likes being angry. Nobody likes being sad. It's uncomfortable. It feels like we want to make it better as quickly as we can. So we have to tolerate a little bit of being uncomfortable in order to think long term, in order to be effective long term. So one of the things, is that we're going to talk about is techniques to self-soothe. So techniques to calm down when we're emotionally overwhelmed. And then we're going to talk about acting one mindfully, which means paying attention kind of to both what our emotions are telling us to do and what our rational mind is telling us to do. We want to listen to both and find kind of a balance between the two. We want to find a middle ground between what our emotions are saying and what our rational mind is telling us. Now, that's not to say that our emotions and our rational mind are always in conflict. They aren't, but they're looking at different things. They have different criteria in mind. So, the stop sign. The first step when we come to a stop sign is to stay perfectly still. You have to stop the car at the stop sign. You have to come to a complete stop. I'm not talking about a rolling stop. I'm talking about a complete stop. So stay perfectly still. And I think about using a stop sign is really useful, especially with regards to anger. When you're feeling really angry and you want to yell at somebody, that's the stop sign. Because yelling at somebody, those secondary emotional reactions, which is we feel embarrassed at the end, we feel not effective at the end, and we often don't feel closer to
Can you repeat that? You're actually going in and out.
the person at the end. So when we get really angry or when we get really still, the S, there's a mnemonic device. So, okay, so I'm going to repeat that. So when we get really activated, come to a complete stop. And in the moment, in an interaction with somebody where we're angry or when we're mad, you want to just stand really still, like hold your body really still. Don't move your hands, don't move a muscle. Then you want to take a step back. This can be an actual step back. So if you're really angry or you're thinking about getting in a fight with somebody, let's say you're in a fight with your significant other or with one of your kids or somebody, and you're really angry. First, you want to stop and not move a muscle, and then you want to take a physical step back. That physical step back does two things. One, it de-escalates the situation that you're in with the other person. But two, it tells your brain, okay, we are stepping back. We're not stepping in. We're not leaning into this conflict. We are taking a step back and we are taking a break, right? It triggers that sensation in the brain. It triggers that retreat sensation in the brain. The next is the O. We want to observe what's actually going on. We want to see, wait a minute, is what I'm telling myself, is what I'm feeling actually what's actually happening, right? Is that person across the street really not waving back at me because they're angry? Or am I going to observe something that might make that not true, right? We want to observe what's actually going on. And also by observe, that means checking in with ourselves, right? Is what I'm feeling really anger, or is that something else, right? Am I feeling abandoned? Am I feeling hurt? Am I feeling taken advantage of? What's actually going on in this situation, right? What am I actually feeling? What do I actually need? You want to ask yourself whether the intensity of the emotion that you're feeling fits the circumstances. Do I need to be this mad, right? My husband didn't do the dishes. Do I really need to scream at him, or do I need to just maybe talk to him about it, right? Does the intensity of what I'm feeling fit what's going on? It might be that it does, or it might be that it doesn't. We want to just ask ourselves, be a detective about this. And then the last is the P, is proceed mindfully. At a stop sign, after you've looked around, you get to continue on your journey. So you can choose to continue yelling, or you can choose to do something different, to say, I need to take a break. I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling abandoned, to kind of address the actual emotion that's going on underneath. The stop sign isn't designed to stop the interaction. It's designed to de-escalate the interaction. It's designed to choose what's most effective in that situation. The next topic is, so once we've stopped, we've looked around, and we want to kind of proceed, we're still feeling an emotion, and it's really uncomfortable. So we want to do things that are going to help to bring down the intensity of our emotional reaction. So these are some ideas that you can use, and they are of varying utility in varying circumstances. But the first one is, I think, the most useful. I call it controlled breathing, but what it really is breathing in through your nose and out through pursed lips. It's kind of like yoga breathing. You want to focus on breathing out for longer than you breathe in. So it's a normal breath in through the nose, and then a slow and controlled breath out. You want to imagine you're blowing a feather across the surface of a lake, or blowing out birthday candles, but there's a lot of them, so you need to kind of do a sweep. It's a slow and controlled breath out. Our somatic nervous system, which is the nervous system that controls our fight or flight response, is what's activated when we're in a really high emotional response, right? When we're in a really high emotional moment, that somatic nervous system is firing, and it can feel like we're kind of overwhelmed. So breathing out is an off switch for that nervous system. Breathing out tells the body that it's time to stop, that it's time to rest and relax. And so if you breathe out for longer than you breathe in, you're giving your body more off signal than on. On is breathing in, off is breathing out. So breathing out for longer gives you more off, and it helps to kind of calm you down. That's one that I like to practice, and I use it a lot. I use it if I'm in the car and I'm feeling that road rage. I use it if I'm in a fight with my husband or with my kids, or I use it when I'm feeling overwhelmed. I use it when my internet connection is really bad. It's useful to kind of turn off your physical response and to help your body to calm down, help you feel in control of your reaction. The other alternative is intense exercise. I mean, like sprinting up and down the stairs twice, running up and down the block, 10 push-ups, 10 jumping jacks, something like that. Now, you can't always do this. This is not always an option for everybody, but it does work to kind of power out some of that emotion. And then you can kind of come back to dealing with what's actually going on. The next one is the dive reflex. And for this, you want to put an ice pack over your eyes, touching both your top eyebrows and your tops of your cheeks. And you want to hold your breath for as long as you can, maybe 30 seconds if you can. It helps to trick your body into thinking it's diving into cold water. And our bodies are kind of remarkable in that they think when they go into cold water that they need to conserve energy, that they need to slow down, right? So engaging the dive reflex slows down your response, slows down your heart rate, slows down your breathing, and helps you to feel a little bit more in control. It's one to practice. It's one to try. It's pretty easy to do. I mean, it's not something you can carry around and do at work, but it does actually work in kind of a soothing way. Distraction, watching TV, reading a book, playing a game on your phone. I know a lot of people play Candy Crush or those kinds of games. Those are a good distraction. We can't live in distraction, but when you're really uncomfortable and really emotional, just distracting yourself for long enough so that you kind of surf over the worst part of the wave and are able to kind of get to a place where you can be effective at dealing with what's coming up for you. Soothing support means asking somebody for some soothing, asking for a hug, asking for somebody to sit next to you, asking for something that would help you to feel better. If you have a dog, sometimes hugging your dog, getting these kinds of soothing supports when we're really activated can be helpful and help us to slow down. Saying no to crisis urges. So that's where it's like, it feels really urgent that you do something. Where you feel like you have to do something, even though you know it's not what you want to do. Sometimes just saying no out loud helps to kind of stop you. It helps to kind of break you out of that urge and break you out of that cycle. And the last is willingness. Being willing to be uncomfortable. Being willing to be in the moment. Being willing to experience our emotions. It's really hard, but it also kind of helps us to manage our emotions. It's an acceptance that we are going to get upset, that we are going to be angry, that we are going to be uncomfortable. And it's knowing that emotion won't last forever. So those are kind of some tools that you can use to manage discomfort. I saw that people are saying that they would like to have the slides. I'm sure that's possible and they can be emailed out. I will have the person who's in charge of admin who has all of your email addresses, I will send them to him and ask him to send them out to you so you can have them. Okay, so acting one mindfully. We want to find a place of balance between our reasonable mind and our emotion mind, okay? I think of these as being in the state of wise mind. Now, I didn't come up with this. This came from Marsha Linehan's book, which is a DBT skills workbook. Basically, DBT is a mode of therapy that uses all of these tools to manage your emotions. So that's where a lot of these things came from, these ideas come from. We want to balance that hot emotional mind and our reasonable mind, which is kind of more cool and logical, and come to a place that allows both of them to feel heard, that accommodates the needs of each. And I think of this also as like being like right-handed or left-handed, right? One or the other is probably more where you live, right? You might feel like everything comes from your emotion mind and you never really listen to that reasonable mind, that rational mind. You're not used to focusing on that mind. Or you might feel like reasonable mind feels really safe, feels really good. And that emotion mind over here is scary. I don't want to focus on that. I don't want to be ruled by my moods, right? The idea is to find a place of balance, to hear what our emotions are telling us, but also to apply reason and logic and to look at the facts and whether or not those emotions that are talking to us are telling us something that is true, and finding ways to accommodate both. We want to balance them. We don't want to ignore one because it's there, it's information, and it's useful. In group, I tend to do this with an example of picking a spouse, right? The reasonable mind is going to identify things that we can evaluate, makes a certain amount of money, has a similar job to mine, has brothers and sisters, wants kids, right? Those are the reasonable mind criteria. The emotion mind criteria are feels funny, feels safe, loves me, understands me. You can pick from the emotion mind side, right? But if you pick a spouse from only the emotion mind side, you might get a spouse who doesn't want kids, never has a job, isn't willing to contribute, doesn't really care about money when you want a house, and is happy to just play their guitar on the couch. Now, it's fine, that might be fine with you, but it might not be fine with you. And if you ignore the reasonable mind in picking a spouse, you're going to end up with somebody that maybe satisfies all these emotional things, but you're going to fight a lot because you don't share the reasonable mind things. And if you pick from the reasonable mind side, you might end up with a serial killer because you're picking somebody who has a good job, shares your same interests, and is 5'11" or whatever, and not focusing on makes me feel safe, right? We want to pick a spouse from a place that hears both sides, right? So that's how I like to think about acting one mindfully. We want to listen to both sides because both sides are providing really interesting and useful information. And then find a place that balances them. It maybe is not possible to satisfy all of the things that our reasonable mind wants. It maybe is not possible to satisfy all of the things that our emotion mind wants, but there might be some criteria that accommodate both that allows us to really feel satisfied. So building supportive relationships. The first thing is to accept that other people are doing the best that they can to love us. So here's a story from my own relationship because I think it's really useful in sort of illustrating this. When I drive home after work, sometimes when I used to go out to go to work, I would listen to the news and I would get upset about something that I heard on the news. And I'd want to come home and I'd want to tell my husband about what I heard on the news and have him tell me that, that's terrible or whatever. And what would actually happen is I would come home and I would tell him about what I heard on the news, and he would say, "Oh, no, you don't have to worry about that. That's not going to happen, or that's not going to be a big deal because of X, Y, and Z reason." And then I would get mad because I would feel like he was telling me that I didn't understand what I was hearing on the news. And then suddenly I'm yelling at him and telling him about, all of my degrees and why I understand what's happening. And he is totally confused and we're fighting. What I had to kind of realize was that he wanted me to feel better. That's what he was trying to do. That was his goal. But he didn't know how to do that. He was making me feel better in a way that somebody's asking for a screenshot. I can go back at the end. I'll zoom back to it at the end so you can get a screen grab of it. I had to accept that he was doing the best that he could, but that he wasn't being effective because he didn't know what I wanted. He didn't know what I needed. He didn't understand what was going to make me feel better. So first I had to think about, well, what do I actually want him to do? Like, what do I actually need in order to feel better? Obviously, if I don't need him to explain why it's not important, because that's not making me feel better. What do I actually need? I need to feel heard, right? In that situation, I just wanted him to say, "You know what? You're right. That's terrible." And then I would feel better. I would feel like he heard what I was saying. I would feel like he understood what I was saying. And I wouldn't need any more than that. That's all I really needed, was just that validation. So how do you do that? You have to ask for that. And you have to ask for it specifically. So I had to get in the practice of coming home and saying, "Okay, I'm going to tell you something that I heard on the news. At the end, I just want you to say, 'You're right, that stinks.' That's all I need. I don't need you to explain it to me. I don't need to discuss it. I don't want to get into it. I just want you to say, 'You're right, that stinks.'" And at first, he kind of fought me on it because he was like, "Well, don't you want me to explain to you why you don't need to worry about it?" And I said, No. All I need you to say is, "You're right, that stinks." So then I would tell him what I heard on the radio, and he would sort of start to explain it. And I'd say, No, I just want you to say, "You're right, that stinks." And he would roll his eyes and say, "You're right, that stinks." And I would feel better. I would give him in response that I feel better and we don't have to talk about it anymore. It was a negotiation. I had to figure out what I wanted, and I had to ask him to give it to me. And then I had to accept when he did as good enough, right? He didn't really want to say, "You're right, that stinks." He wanted to tell me why I didn't have to worry about it. But he wanted more for me to feel better. So I had to help him out. I had to give him the tools to help me feel better, because it's really hard to know what's going to make somebody else feel better. So you have to understand your goals. You have to consider the consequences of reacting, the consequences of what you're asking for, and how you'll feel if they can't or won't give it to you. So both short-term and long-term consequences. You want to clarify your priorities. So is your priority to get what you actually want? The priority of getting what you actually want, the objective, is what kind of, I think of it as like when I go into the store, I want to buy something. I don't really care about my relationship with the clerk long term. I'm not worried about my self-respect. I just want to get something. If I'm having a discussion with my boss and I need a raise in order to keep working there, what I actually want is the raise. That's what's important. I don't care as much about the relationship with my boss long term because I've decided that I need the raise in order to keep working there. And I don't care about my self-respect as much as I care about getting the raise. So in some circumstances, like with the dishes and my husband, keeping a positive relationship is the priority, right? It might be that I just need to get the dishes done, but sometimes I actually do care more about the relationship than the dishes. I hope long term, most of us care more about the relationship than the dishes, but you know. So clarifying your priorities in interactions and clarifying what you need in an interaction. I think the last one, maintaining your self-respect, is one that we often overlook. I think it's important. It's important that we leave interactions in a way that allows us to feel good, that allows us to feel like we have achieved the things that we wanted to achieve, that we have done it in a way that we feel that we can still maintain our self-respect. And then the last point about understanding your goals is we have to accept that we can't control other people's responses. We can tell them what we need. Like I could tell my husband, this is what I want you to say, but I can't actually make him say it. That's a choice that he has to make. He has to be willing to do that, and he has to choose to do that. And so I have to kind of accept that I can't always do that. Missed keeping a positive relationship. Okay, so keeping a positive relationship, sometimes in conversations or in negotiations or in emotional situations with another person, the most important thing for us is to keep a positive relationship with that person, right? So what you actually want, the objective priority is getting what you want accomplished. Keeping a positive relation means I don't care about the thing that we're talking about as much as I care about maintaining this relationship, maintaining positive feelings, maintaining the feeling that this person feels positively about me. All three of those imply kind of different approaches, right? If what you actually want is the thing, you can approach it in a much more assertive way. You can approach it in a much more technical way. So I'm gonna scoot ahead here because if you are approaching a situation where you want to get the thing, you can describe the situation, you can express your feelings and beliefs, and then you ask for what you want. That's sort of the example of telling my husband, this is what I want you to say. If your priority is to keep the relationship, you're going to be softer. You're going to be more willing to hear what they have to say. You're going to be more focused on their perspective, on validating their perspective, on letting them know that you understand them, even if you don't agree with them. If you're focused on maintaining your self-respect, it's more important to be fair to yourself, to not apologize, to stick to your values, and to be truthful, right? You can do these things in the other circumstances, but you're going to be softer in the relationship when you're focused on keeping a positive relationship than if what's really important is I want to feel like I stood up for myself, right? This is when we're drawing boundaries, when we are saying no to something. And the most important thing that I think that you can remember when you say no to something is that no itself is a complete sentence. Saying no without apologizing, without offering, an explanation, is important. I can go back to the objective one at the end, yes. So I will scroll through them again and let people get screen caps. So that's sort of the idea. I appreciate you guys coming in tonight, and I apologize again for the connections.